I actually entered this field, which is deeply humanitarian and community-oriented, through an interest in the environment. In the early 90s, I was increasingly frustrated that people seemed to care about the environment, but we had no good way of doing anything about it, particularly at a policy level. And I started investigating why that could be so. Really passionate people could go out on Earth Day and wave their arms, but our laws didn't change commensurate with the kinds of threats we were seeing to the environment. In '93, I came across some literature that began to make sense of this to me. We have a very concrete measure of our economic health, or at least it's not perfect, but the GDP, the gross domestic product, measures all of the exchanges of money that people make for each other and adds them all up, no matter whether I'm giving you money or you're giving me money, that exchange gets counted into the GDP. And at the end of every year, we total it all up and we say it went up or it went down by this much. And all of the economists who invented the GDP have always said this is not really a good measure of progress or how good things are. It is solely a measure of what our economy is doing. But our policymakers, who are not always so subtle in their thinking, have used it from its inception as a measure of well-being and of progress. The difficulty is it's very powerful. When you have a number and politicians can pull up charts and graphs and they put the number up there, it's very hard for people who get up and say, but our animals are dying and our water is not clean anymore and people are having health problems from the environment. If you don't have any number, or particularly if you don't have a single number to weigh against the GDP, the issues don't remain in the public dialogue. They evaporate. While I was reading about that relating to the environment, it became clear that exactly the same problem existed for our social well-being, our social capital. And the language that I began to understand best was that because we were blind to social and environmental capital, our economic world was beginning to cannibalize those things that were invisible to us. So there was an article written, if the GDP is up, why is America down? And it really detailed what was happening. So for example, the Exxon Valdez oil spill, which destroyed enormous amounts of environmental capital and in indigenous communities in Prince William Sound, social capital as well. That was invisible at the same time that the GDP went up a great deal because so much money was spent on cleaning up Prince William Sound after the spill. I looked around to see if there were what they called indicators, a sort of starchy term, but the big indicator for the economic world is the GDP. Were there indicators that we could use for the environment? And at that time I concluded probably not, and it's still a big difficulty for the environment. But Edgar Kahn, whose name is going to be up on one of these slides, had recently invented this thing called time dollars or time banking, where neighbors, based on a system of reciprocity, create their own economics, their own currency, and they exchange services for one another. And it's not one based in self-interest, the way our formal economy is. We have another economy called the volunteer economy, and that's based in altruism. We understand both of those really well. We understand dealing with our self-interest and being kind to other people. But the one which used to dominate humankind's interactions, which was reciprocity, has been lost to us largely because it was really cannibalized or taken over by the formal economy, not through anybody's fault, by the way, but because the formal economy was such a powerful tool. It was the hammer that made everything else look like a nail, and the informal or core economy gradually declined to the point where most people forgot about it. So by simultaneously introducing a currency whereby reciprocity was encouraged and also measured through counting up the time dollars that were exchanged in precisely the same fashion that we exchange regular dollars, it seemed to me that we might be able to create a proxy for social capital and social well-being that could, in the policy circles, counteract some of the excess weight of the formal economy. So based on that, and it's terribly abstract sounding, although it matters a great deal to our future, I decided that I would try this. It had been tried in a few communities around the US, and it made sense to me to bring it to my hometown. I live in Falmouth. And so starting in I think it was 95, we first introduced time banking, and we've been going ever since then with greater and lesser success over time. It turns out it isn't simple to create a new economy. But that's how we got started. I would have to say that I do not yet see this alternative indicator entering policy discussions in a way that acts as an effective counterbalance to the formal economy. But at least now, as Ed will be telling you, the movement is beginning to spread. And if it spreads far enough and becomes ordinary enough for people to not only live in self-interested relation with one another, but mutually interested relation with one another, we may be able both to measure and to sustain and grow our social capital that has been lost. That's the great hope. I would say that the jury is still out as to whether we'll succeed in this, but it still feels to me as though it's a worthwhile undertaking.